Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and so excited to be joining everyone today with my first official video as a Honeybee Stamps design team member. So I absolutely had to use the Zen Bouquet stamp set. I finally got my hands on it and I have been wanting to play with this one for so long. So I started off with some Canson XL Watercolor paper. And I purposely cut this to 8.5 by 5.5 inches because I'm intending to cut this in half and get 2 card fronts out of this, or that was my original intention. So I purposely cut the cards or the watercolor paper that large, and I have it in my MISTI here, and then I centered this huge stamp in this Zen Bouquet set right in the middle of it. So I used my anti-static powder tool first on this watercolor paper just to prevent the embossing powder from sticking to anything but the stamped image because, you know, fingerprints, anything like that can grasp any sort of embossing powder. And then I inked up my stamp with VersaMark ink, closed the lid of my MISTI, and then really made sure to press down really well. I am stamping on the textured side of this watercolor paper. I find though with the Canson XL, it's not too textured, so I usually have good results, especially if I use a MISTI, that just helps. So got it stamped, and then I am coating everything with my Hero Arts white embossing powder here. Just kind of turning around and moving it, because like I said, this stamp is huge. It's around like it goes from one side to the other, and this is 5.5 inches wide. And it's just slightly wider than that. It's so big, I just love it. So I stamped it, covered it in the embossing powder, melted it all with my heat tool, and then off camera I did a second piece because while I was doing this I'm like, my mind started coming up with some more ideas. So my first one here is to just watercolor this in. So I decided to only use 3 different colors of distress ink. I'm using Picked Raspberry, Mermaid Lagoon, and Mustard Seed. And I super sped this up. It didn't take that long to do. That's one thing with this specific set that it's very intimidating when you look at it. Like, I just see a lot of work, a lot of time. I'm like, I don't have time for this, you know, but yet it's so pretty. However, doing something like this, like watercoloring, it didn't take that long. And only using 3 colors, these, like, you know, if you use like a pink, a blue, and a yellow, you could use a red, a blue, and yellow if you wanted, but I prefer using pink. It just gives more options. And I'm just mixing the colors as I go along, picking some of them up from here, picking some up from there. And I end up getting this completely fully multicolored image. Like I'm creating the green with the Mermaid Lagoon and the Mustard Seed. And you can get, you know, a ton of different shades of green depending on how much blue you add or how much yellow you add. And same with the orange shades. I'm mixing the Picked Raspberry with the Mustard Seed. So I just smushed these little, the mini distress inks onto, I just have this plastic palette from Art Impressions that I like to use. And then I'm just picking up the color with a paintbrush. Some areas I was wetting first with clean water, and then I was, you know, kind of dropping the color in. But the further I got on as I was doing this image, I was just applying color. I was like, whatever. You know, you can get some really fun results if you do the clean water trick and then, you know, you drop the color and you let it dry and it kind of does its thing. But again, this is a huge image. There's a lot of detail. I was holding the stamp set, like the backing sheet, in my other hand while I was doing this because that really helped since I had done, you know, white heat embossing basically on white cardstock. It's hard to see, you know, the detail and what's what. So I was referring to the actual stamp image on the backing sheet, and that helped a lot to just be like, oh, okay, so this flower is the same as this one, so I'll do the same colors. You know, this is a flower, this is a leaf, etc., etc. So I just went along and started from the center and just kept working my way out. And it was just so much fun to see all the detail sort of take place as the colors, you know, start to add all that definition and everything. So while areas were still wet, I would go in, you know, with a little bit more concentrated of color, just give it that little bit of definition. And that was it though. I wasn't going to do any more layers with this because otherwise I would have been here all night. And as it was, I kind of was just everything I was doing because I ended up making 4 cards. So did all my watercoloring. And that was done. You could have done like 5 pieces with this. Smushing these little mini ink pads, like I had a ton of leftover ink. So this is where the second piece comes into play. So I sprayed this with my, just my spray bottle here. So I'm just spraying everything with water. And I'm going to do the whole little ink smushing technique that is so fun with distress inks. But this way I can use up these inks. I found though, because of the way I had already arranged them and the fact that a lot of the colors were already like being mixed from watercoloring, these went muddy really quickly. But I was okay with it. It just happened. So I used up as much as I could until I started seeing how muddy it was getting there near the bottom. Like it was turning into full on like brownie mud color. So I dabbed up a little bit and then I just wiped off this palette and then just kept doing the same thing. It works better on a craft sheet. It really does. Smooshing ink pads onto the craft sheet, the colors, they seem to move a little bit better on a craft sheet just because of the type of surface. But I was like too lazy to pull it out. So I just kept using this palette. So just mush the ink pads onto the palette again, sprayed it with water, and I had this piece already dry so I can go in with another layer of all these colors and just kind of mush them back and forth to really add some color. And I'm just going to keep doing this over and over again until I'm happy with it. I kind of overworked it a little bit, but at the same time, it's fun to see. It always is different. And it's always interesting to see how the layers kind of interact with one each other and being distressing to react with one another. So I just kept smushing the colors in till I was like happy with that layer. Then I'd let it dry, or I was drying it with my heat tool. And then I wanted to add some more picked raspberry because I was like losing a lot of the pink there. So I was smushing that into it too. And then I would just keep going back and just adding, you know, pressing it into some of the splatters, pressing it into more of like the solid areas. Cause I wanted to make sure I really fully covered the entire area where the actual stamped image was. Because obviously, again, it's heat embossed white on white. So I wanted to make sure to add more color than maybe I normally would so that you could see all the detail of the heat embossing. So I just kind of went back and forth and then finally got to the point where I was, you know, picking some up, moving some of the color around with my fingers and just kind of pressing it into some of the areas because obviously since I'm doing this on top of heat embossing, it was resisting some of the ink. So I was just having a grand old time. It was so much fun. And I had ink everywhere. I think I still do have ink on my hands, just staining. So got it basically to where I wanted it. And then heated it one last time with my heat tool to completely dry all of this ink. I could have gone even further and, you know, sprayed it with water a bit if I wanted to, you know, get that sort of effect. But I had so much going on that I was happy with the way it was. So got everything dry. And then I'm using the coordinating die set for the Zen Bouquet to cut out the largest image. I wasn't originally going to do this. I was just going to cut this in half and layer it onto just adhere it to 2 card bases. But I really like the coordinating die. I would never probably have bothered to like hand trim this out, but having the die, I was like, sweet. Lined it all up, taped it into place, making sure I had it perfectly lined up because after spending all that time coloring it. And then the splattery piece I die cut with Honeybee's A2 double stitched frames. So I used the largest die to die cut those. And then I took this detailed piece here and lined it up in my paper trimmer and kind of centered it as best I could. And then I sliced it in half. Yeah, it kind of just for a second, it's like, oh, what did I just do? But again, I wanted to get 2 cards out of this after putting in all the effort. So cut those in half and then I die cut some black cardstock with the Hugs die and then the Hello die. And those dies come, you know, with the outline word as well as a bubble. And then there's actually a third layer you can use that has some little dots on it, which is really cute. But I just used the word and the 1 bubble die for each of these. And the bubbles I die cut from some Vellum. So I'm just going to adhere all the black cardstock words to the Vellum with my Nuvo adhesive. And I'm just using a really thin amount. You don't want this oozing out at all, especially on Vellum, because Vellum is very difficult to conceal adhesive with. So I just applied a really thin amount because that's all it was needed. Got all of my sentiments adhered. I'm going to set all this aside and I want to work on my card bases. As I was doing this, I was like, what am I going to do on the insides of these cards? Anyone who knows me knows I really like to finish the insides of my cards. So I got all 4 of my card bases, which is just heavyweight white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 11. And then I scored them all at 5 1/2. So they'll be top folding A2 sized cards. And then I relined this up in my MISTI, relined up the large stamp so it would stamp on the lower portion of these cards. And then what I decided to do was just ink up the stamp again, or just the top area because I don't have to ink up the whole thing, with the same distress inks, starting with my lightest to darkest because obviously they're going to kind of pick up some of the color. So I started with the mustard seed and then I was adding the Mermaid Lagoon and then the picked raspberry and just kind of randomly like dabbing them around here, and obviously they're going to mix a bit. And then I lightly misted the stamp with my spray bottle, just like 2 light mists from a good, probably more than a foot away. And then stamped that onto the inside of the first card. I didn't clean the stamp off. I did this a second time, so inked it up, doing the same order with the mustard seed, the mermaid lagoon, and the picked raspberry. So they're also picking up some of the previous ink that's still left on there, so and they blend a little bit more. And then sprayed these again, stamped it. So after the second time, you can tell the colors are starting to blend a little more, and after this, they're just going to keep getting muddy. So I did it the second time like this, and then I just wiped off the stamp with a baby wipe, and then did the same process 2 more times. So wiped off with a baby wipe, lined up my next card base, inked up the stamp with the Distress inks, sprayed it with water, and then I'm going to stamp that onto the inside of these cards. So, and as I was doing this, I was like, this would actually be yet another fun idea for this, is to do this on an actual card front. So ink up the stamp like this and spray it with water, and then just stamp it directly onto a white card base. Or you could even make your card base out of watercolor paper and then spritz it again and get, a really fun, smeary, watercolory, image. So this set is just fun. So I did that for the insides. And then for the splattery backgrounds that I had die cut with the double stitched frames, I applied foam tape to all of these and then adhered them both to the card bases. And then I'm going to adhere the sentiments and do the exact same thing. I'm only applying adhesive directly behind where the black cardstock is, and you can see the little dark areas, and that's where the adhesive is, how it just shows through the vellum. So I made sure to apply the adhesive right directly behind the cardstock, and then I'm going to press that into place and let it dry. And I did that with both. And then for the detail piece that I had cut in half here, I did think it would look really pretty if it was popped up on foam tape, but I decided instead to just adhere it flat to the card base because it still had the dimension of being, die cut and embossed and all that. So I used the same Nuvo adhesive. It always looks like I'm applying more on video, but really I'm not. I try not to put too much on because 1, you don't want it oozing out, and 2, it will warp your cardstock if you use too much. So just applied enough to really make sure it's adhered to my card front. Did the same thing with the second one, paying attention especially to the free edge there. That's going to go like right up against the edge of the card. And then just along the edges, and then a really thin little amount in the center. Adhere that. And then I'm going to adhere both of the sentiments in the exact same way. Just applying the adhesive. That's another reason why I didn't apply the detail image with foam tape, because then I was going to have to fiddle around and like cut thin, tiny little strips of foam tape for the sentiments, and I just didn't want to bother. So I wanted to just let all the color and everything kind of stand out. So I kept the rest of these cards simple. I didn't add any more embellishments. A person totally could. I thought about some sequins and rhinestones and all that, but the coloring I think was more than enough. Plus these are just really flat and easy to mail. So that finished off my cards. As always, I will have a link below the video, like links to all the supplies used and all that info in the description box below the video. So check that out if you are interested. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all so much for watching and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you guys for just visiting my corner of the interwebs today. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.